They are widely known as one of the fiercest enemies of Gondor. Many serve the Dark Lords, and one of their number even became the second greatest of the Nazgul. But how did these men come to serve Sauron and Morgoth? And were they all truly evil at heart? Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the Easterlings of Middle-earth. To cover the history of the Easterlings, we must go back to the very beginning of the race of men. Over 4,000 years after the awakening of the elves at Lake Cuiviénen, the first age of the world begins with the first ever sunrise. As the sun rises in the west, the men of Middle-earth awake in the far eastern land of Hildorien. Yes, you heard that right. The first sunrise was actually in the west. The original intent was that the sun should pass back and forth across the sky and never set. However, these plans were changed by the Valar, and instead the sun descended into Valinor in the west, passing beneath the earth and rising again in the east, giving us a more familiar sunrise and sunset. Unfortunately, unlike the elves, the men did not have the intervention and protection of the Valar in their earliest days. Morgoth discovers that the second children of Iluvatar have come, and personally travels to the east, where he works to corrupt them to his will. Some of the men would instead flee to the west, and would become known as the Edain, the great allies of the elves in the First Age, and the ancestors of Numenor and the Dunedain. Many of the men who had remained in the east for a time eventually make their way west as well. These men, now known as Easterlings, split. While some remain in the eastern portions of Middle-earth, others travel north above the Blue Mountains and arrive in the lands of Lothlin in 463. These men are motivated by the rumor of land and riches that await them in Beleriand and are secretly allied with Morgoth. These Easterlings, led by their lords Bor and Ulfang, come to meet Maedhros, who lived in the east of Beleriand. Maedhros gives the men lands to the north and south of his own to dwell in. It is said that the people of Bor were worthy folk and tillers of the earth, likely meaning they were early farmers of Middle-earth. The men of Bor and Ulfang joined the Union of Maedhros, a great alliance of men, elves, and dwarves to stand against Morgoth. In 472, the alliance moves to open war with the Dark Lord in the Nirnaeth Arnoediad. Many tragedies and triumphs occur in this battle, but the final stroke that would prove fatal for the alliance would come from within. For in this moment, the House of Ulfang reveals its treachery. They turn on the alliance, sealing its defeat. Meanwhile, the House of Bor would stand by their elven friends. Staring death in the face, they reject any previous alliance with Morgoth. And while it is believed that Bor was already dead by the time of this battle, his 3 sons battle the 3 sons of Ulfang, killing them before they are slain themselves. Afterward, Bor would be known among the elves as Bor the Faithful, the greatest of the Easterlings of old, and leader of his great and loyal house. As for the people of Ulfang, Morgoth had promised them rich reward for their treachery, but he denies them the fertile lands of Beleriand. Instead, he sends them to the lands of Hithlum. There, Morgoth and the Easterlings enslave many among the people of Hador, and some of its women are forced into marriage. In this time of servitude under Morgoth, the Easterlings would at times work side by side with the orcs. 16 years after the Nirnaeth, a group of orcs and Easterlings attacks elven refugees fleeing from Hithlum. It is here that Lorgan, the chieftain of all the Easterlings of Hithlum, captures the 16-year-old man Tuor and makes him a slave until Tuor would escape in 491. Later, Turin Turambar returns to his home of Dorlomin and finds Broda, an Easterling chief ruling in his father's realm. After exchanging words, Turin kills Broda and many of the Easterlings in his hall before fleeing the realm in 496. Turin's actions, while they could be seen as a fulfilling act of revenge for the character, would not make a great impact for the realm as a whole, which is still under Easterling control under Lorgan. Years later, in 500 of the First Age, after the death of his children, Hurin is released by Morgoth and returns home to Dor-lómin. There he confronts Lorgan, who, along with many people of Hithlum, believed that Hurin must have joined Morgoth. Hurin rejects the friendship of Lorgan, revealing that he is no friend of Morgoth. Being more cunning than his followers who draw their swords at this news, Lorgan interprets Morgoth's reason for letting Hurin go free, that Hurin's actions may indeed bring about more evil, and he allows Hurin to leave Hithlum unharmed. 45 years later, the final climactic battle of the First Age begins. Like Ulfang before them, the Easterlings of Beleriand would ally with Morgoth in this War of Wrath. After Morgoth is utterly defeated in 587, the surviving Easterlings would flee back east over the Blue Mountains, bringing us to the Second Age of the world. As we know, Sauron, Morgoth's chief lieutenant, escapes the judgment of the Valar and flees into hiding. Sauron turns to the east and south in an effort to bend men to his will and servitude. While the east had been free of Morgoth's direct influence for quite some time, Sauron would never let his legend truly die. He preys upon his master's old influence in this region, and many of the Easterlings come to fear Sauron as a king and a god. Under his influence, the Easterlings become greater in number and might. We are told they build many towns and walls of stone, and by the time of the War of the Ring, the Easterlings would even outnumber the men of the West. Over the centuries of the Second Age, Sauron would turn his attention to the elves of Eriador, seeking to manipulate them. It is then that the Rings of Power are created, and the War of the Elves and Sauron begins. After taking control of the 16 Rings of Power, Sauron is defeated by a combined force of elves and Númenóreans, causing him to retreat back to Mordor. In Mordor, however, he would not stay. He continues expanding his influence to the east, gaining more servants and worshippers. Among these is an Easterling lord known as Khamûl. Sauron gives to Khamûl a ring of power, to make him a great sorcerer and ruler among men. But over time, Khamûl would begin to fade until he becomes a wraith, one of the 9 Nazgûl. It is also during the Second Age, roughly the year 1600, that the Blue Wizards come to Middle-earth. They travel to the east, where their exact deeds are unknown, but we'll get to that in a minute. At the end of the Second Age, Sauron is defeated in the War of the Last Alliance. With Sauron's greatest defeat to date, the men of the East are finally released from his tyranny. However, the effects of thousands of years of Sauron's influence would not disappear in a mere instant. We are told that there are battles pitting Easterling against Easterling in the time that followed Sauron's first downfall. Some Easterlings would journey to the west, and finally enter the records of Gondor in 490 of the Third Age. In this year, they attack the Gondorians between the Sea of Rhûn and the Ash Mountains. In 500, King Romendasil would drive the Easterlings back in defeat. 41 years later, the Easterlings would counter, killing Romendasil in battle before he is avenged by his son, Turambar. After this, the Easterlings would cease their attempts to battle Gondor. However, their attention would be turned elsewhere by an ancient but familiar force. By 1000 of the Third Age, a shadow has crept back into the world. Sauron establishes fortress of Dol Guldur in Mirkwood, and he causes Easterlings to move against the Northmen of the region. This also leads the Hobbits, who currently live in the Vales of Anduin, to make their move west. The Easterlings, and even some of the Northmen who are won to their side, would resume their attacks against Gondor. In 1248, in the days of King Narmasil I, an Easterling army marches between Rhovanion and the Sea of Rhun, before being defeated by a group of Gondorians and Northmen. At this point, the Easterlings disappear from Gondorian records for hundreds of years, a period that coincides with Gondor facing hostilities with the Corsairs of Umbar and the people of the south. But as usual, Sauron would not leave the Easterlings in peace for long. Emissaries of the Dark Lord bring together tribes of Easterlings to form a group known as the Wainriders, so that they may move against both Gondor and the Northmen. The Wainriders are better armed than their predecessors, journeying in great wagons and using them to fortify their camps. They also trained their women, children, and old men in fighting, allowing them to defend their camps from attackers, while their soldiers executed their offensive strategies. Gondor, which at this time has been weakened by the Great Plague, is defeated in a battle with the Wainriders in 1856. This allows the Wainriders to raid the lands of Rhovanion and enslave its people. In 1899, King Kalimetar of Gondor, with the help of the Northmen, leads a successful and decisive victory against the Wainriders. But 45 years later, the Wainriders would return. This time, they would be allied with others under Sauron's influence, the Haradrim and the Variags. While the Haradrim invade South Ithilien, the Wainriders would attack Ithilien from the north. King Ondoher of Gondor sends Eärnil, one of his captains, south, while the king and his sons go north. The Wainriders crush the Gondorian defense, killing the king and both his heirs in the battle. Rather than proceeding deeper into Gondor, the Wainriders make camp and begin celebrating their perceived conquest. Meanwhile, Eärnil had led Gondor's inferior southern army in destroying the attacking Haradrim, and immediately turned north. Reinforced with retreating northern troops, Eärnil's army descends upon the Wainriders, driving many into the dead marshes and handing them a crushing defeat. Eärnil is crowned king of Gondor, and the Easterlings would not trouble the realm for hundreds of years. Not long after this battle, in 2063, the Necromancer would retreat from Dol Guldur when Gandalf enters the fortress. While this would be a positive development and result in the watchful peace for the Westlands, Sauron would hide in the east, working to build a stronger and mightier alliance among the various groups of Easterlings. Nearly 500 years later, a new group of Easterlings under Sauron's rule would bring war to the west. The Balcoth, descendants of the Wainriders, would join with orcs of the Misty Mountains and overrun the plains of Calenarthon in northern Gondor. With the line of the kings now ended, Cirion, the steward of Gondor, leads his army against the Balcoth and are very nearly destroyed. However, Cirion had sent word to their old allies, once known as the Northmen, who rode their great horses to their aid. Thus, the army of the Balcoth are defeated, and the Eotheid are rewarded by Cirion with the lands of Calenarthon, becoming the Rohirrim of the new kingdom of Rohan. As for the Easterlings, aside from smaller attacks on Rohan in 2545, they would retreat to the east until the Dark Lord would make his last great war, the War of the Ring. In this war, the Easterlings in the service of Sauron would fight on two fronts. They would of course fight alongside the Haradrim and Variags in the Battle of Pelennor Fields, but they would also feature heavily in a northern host, marching against Dale and Erebor. In this northern campaign, they would win the Battle of Dale, resulting in the deaths of King Brand and King Dain, and a siege upon the mountain. With the destruction of the One Ring on March 25, 3019, the morale of Sauron's northern force is broken, and the dwarves and men are able to break the siege on March 27th. In the Fourth Age, King Aragorn Elessar is said to have pardoned the Easterlings who had given themselves up and sends them away free. he frees the slaves of Mordor and gives them the lands around Lake Nurnen to be their own. We are also told that Elisar makes peace with the peoples of Harad. And while his pardoning of many Easterlings is a sign that the relationship would improve between the realms, we are also told that Aragorn and Éomer would battle with the Easterlings who were most dedicated to Sauron in the years to come. This should not come as a surprise, as the East had been a place of concentration and a safe haven for the Dark Lord for hundreds, if not thousands of years, at various points in the Second and Third Ages. No doubt his hold over his servants in this land was stronger even than his hold over the Haradrim in the south. As we look at the history of the Easterlings, we arrive at a very common question. Were all these people in the East evil? This topic could make an entire video of its own, but in short, no, not all the Easterlings were evil. Aside from the Easterlings who were pardoned, we can also circle back to the Blue Wizards for further evidence. In Tolkien's later writings, he says that were it not for the Blue Wizards, the forces of the East would have outnumbered and overwhelmed those of the West. Now what does this mean, and how did the Blue Wizards accomplish this? Tolkien doesn't say for certain, but I firmly believe the most logical explanation is that the Blue Wizards led those among the Easterlings who refused to serve Sauron, much like Gandalf leads and guides the free peoples in the West. In the history of the Easterlings, we see the greatest skill of Sauron, not to create powerful weapons, but to create division, corrupting men to his service, and manipulating men against one another. As we look at the lands affected by Sauron, it's amazing to think how quickly a darkening Numenor fell into Morgoth worship and destruction, a mere 57 years after Sauron's capture. And while Sauron certainly had great success in the East, it's incredible to think there were still good men after thousands of years of Sauron's influence. While the majority of Easterlings may have fallen under his sway, I believe we must realize there were likely many who stood against him, those in the very mold of Bor the Faithful. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Jim Limber Davis, Jay Breakfield, Lissamy the Cinda, Dane Ragnarsson, Sky Carcass, Zetrock, Grand Strategy Nerd, The Dark-Haired One, Salim Rahman, Slide Belts, Wyland, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.